Why is Kingdom Come Deliverance II set in Bohemia, of all places? This might seem like an unusual choice compared to England or France, the usual go-to medieval settings. But the Czech developers not only wanted to showcase their homeland, but a kingdom that was once one of the richest and most powerful in Europe. Bohemia is one of two states in the modern-day Czech Republic. You have Bohemia, and the other region is Moravia. Bohemia is the western part, which borders Germany, while Moravia is in the east and touches the Austrian and Slovakian borders. Bohemia's ancient origins can be traced back to the Celtic Boii people who settled the area during the Iron Age. They were a powerful and prominent Celtic Gallic tribe, and they were well known to the Romans and other ancient civilizations. And they were noted for their wealth, gold, and warlike culture. And the region of Bohemia was the heartland of their territory. Later, during the migration period from 300 to 600 AD, you have a lot of shifting populations that led to the arrival of the Slavs, who became the dominant ethno-linguistic group in Bohemia by the 6th century. So when Bohemia starts to come into existence as a kingdom, it was during the empire of Greater Moravia, which was one of the first unified Western Slavic states. Great Moravia was very involved with Christianizing a lot of the region. They even brought in Saint Cyril and Methodius to help with this conversion. They didn't want any more pagan practices in the region, and it was the fashion to convert to Christianity. The Bohemians were really into this. They wanted to become Christian. So eventually Great Moravia began to decline due to invasions from the Magyars. Also, their ruler was killed, Svatopluk. And so that's when the Czechs of Bohemia began to pave the way for their own rise to power, because they had something that Great Moravia didn't have. So what the Bohemians have that Great Moravia didn't have was silver mines. They had vast resources of silver. So they were now Christian, and they were also incredibly rich. This very much becomes their reason for being. They become the silver suppliers to the rest of Europe. They minted the Prague groschen, which was one of medieval Europe's most stable currencies. The Germans saw all of this happen. They saw the Bohemians were now Christianized, they were wealthy, so they began a project of incorporating Bohemia into the Holy Roman Empire. When people say Holy Roman Empire, they tend to think of Germans. There were a lot of Germans, yes, but that isn't the full picture. There were also Italians, French, Dutch, and Czech, of course, from Bohemia. And Bohemia became so important to the Holy Roman Empire that they were made one of the 7 electors who get to vote and decide on who the next Holy Roman Emperor would be. So Bohemia becomes incredibly wealthy, important, and they begin to call a lot of the shots. And Prague evolves into this incredibly important place for trade and culture in the Middle Ages. And for centuries, the Kingdom of Bohemia was ruled by the Přemysl dynasty. They were one of the oldest ruling families in Europe, and they unified the Czech lands. But in 1306, the last Přemyslid king, Wenceslaus III, was assassinated and left the Bohemian throne without a direct heir. And after some political maneuvering, John of Luxembourg, who was a prince from modern-day Luxembourg, he married the last Přemyslid princess, and he was crowned the King of Bohemia in 1310. And that's how the rulers of Bohemia changed to this German line, to this German family from the House of Luxembourg. John of Luxembourg was not the kind of ruler who sat in castles making laws. He was a warrior first and a king second. He spent most of his reign fighting in foreign wars and expanding his family's influence rather than governing Bohemia itself. He barely even learned to speak Czech, and he spent more time in France and Germany than in Prague. And the Bohemian nobles, they hated this, and they saw him as an absent landlord, a foreign king who wasn't interested in ruling their lands. And John didn't care at all. He was too busy making a name for himself as one of the greatest knights of his age. In his later years, he went blind due to a disease. Even though he was blind, he still wanted to take part in battles. And when the Battle of Crécy happened in 1346, he went to help the French fight the English, and he was completely blind. So he had his men tie his horse to their horses, and he would just follow them, you know, charge into the battle following them, and he wanted to die like a true knight. And that's exactly what happened. He charged in completely blind and was killed by the English longbow fire. That was the end of King John of Luxembourg. But his son, who was next in line in preparing to rule, would usher in a golden age for Bohemia. He would be remembered as one of the most important rulers in the history of Bohemia, as well as the Czech Republic. His son was Charles IV, and unlike his father, he understood that ruling was a lot more than just fighting in battles. And he was educated in France. He was fluent in multiple languages. He was a diplomat, a scholar, and a strategist. And while his father, John, focused on war, Charles focused on building and legacy. And his first step was to turn Bohemia into the cultural and political heart of Europe. He founded the first university in Central Europe, called Charles University, in 1348, and Prague became a center of learning and philosophy. Even if you go to Prague today, many of the iconic buildings were built by Charles IV during this time. Prague was also a center of science and technology. Some of the earliest firearms in Europe were developed there, which is why the word for pistol is actually a Czech word. It comes from the Czech word pistola. And eventually Charles IV would become the Holy Roman Emperor in 1355, making him the most powerful ruler in Europe. And under Charles IV, Bohemia wasn't just a kingdom, it was the center of an empire. But as history shows, a great ruler's death can throw everything into chaos. In 1378, Charles IV died, leaving his son Wenceslaus IV to inherit the throne. You would think that the son of a great leader would be just as capable, but Wenceslaus IV was nothing like his father. Instead of ruling like a wise king, he spent his time hunting, drinking, and indulging in pleasures. While Bohemia was still wealthy and influential, the cracks were beginning to form. The nobles grew restless, seeing Wenceslaus as weak, and the Catholic Church also clashed with him, questioning his authority. And to make things worse, the Holy Roman Empire, where his father had been a respected emperor, rejected him completely. In the year 1400, Wenceslaus was officially deposed as emperor, losing the title his father had worked so hard to secure. And this is where things start to get dangerous, because while Wenceslaus was stumbling through his rule, his half-brother was carefully watching on the sidelines. Sigismund was the opposite of Wenceslaus. He was cold, calculating, and ruthlessly ambitious. He wasn't going to sit back and watch his half-brother squander the legacy of his father. Charles IV had married off his other son, Sigismund, to the daughter of the King of Hungary, and he eventually became the King of Hungary. The idea of doing this was to strengthen the family's control in Europe of different regions, but it actually did the opposite and led to a conflict within this family. In 1402, Sigismund had enough, and he invaded Bohemia, kidnapped Wenceslaus, and declared himself the true ruler. And to cement his claim, he began marching through Bohemia with fire and steel, forcing nobles to swear loyalty and burning villages to the ground that resisted. And one of those villages was Skalic, the home of Henry, the protagonist in Kingdom Come Deliverance. So that's why in the game Wenceslaus is seen as the true king and Sigismund is seen as the villain. But in reality, Wenceslaus was a terrible king and he needed to be deposed. There's also another really interesting thing about Sigismund, other than the fact that he tried to seize Bohemia for himself. He has another claim to fame. He founded the Order of the Dragon. This was a knightly order dedicated to defending Christendom, and one of its most famous members was Vlad Dracul, the father of Vlad the Impaler, the man who inspired Dracula. So Sigismund founded this order. Without Sigismund, there would be no Order of the Dragon, no Vlad Dracul, and no Dracula. So in a strange way, Bohemian politics helped shape one of the most famous legends of all time. If you liked that video, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.